Bruce Springsteen has told this story exactly 3 times in public. Each time, he tells it the same way. Each time, when he gets to the part about the balcony, people in the room go quiet, in the specific way that people go quiet when they are hearing something true. The story begins in a motel parking lot in California in the winter of 1977, which is an unpromising setting for the kind of conversation that changes a person's life. But most of the conversations that change a person's life happen in unpromising settings, because those are the settings where the defenses are down and the performance of being a professional person in a professional context has temporarily been suspended, and the actual human being is briefly, unexpectedly, accessible. Springsteen was 27 years old. He had just emerged from the 2-year legal battle with his former manager that had frozen his recording career at its most critical moment, the period immediately following Born to Run, when the album had made him famous and the lawsuit had made him unable to follow it. The settlement was recent. The studio time was booked. The next record was waiting to be made, and Springsteen was in the process of understanding what that record needed to be, which was the most difficult kind of process there is, the kind that cannot be forced and cannot be scheduled, and requires a particular quality of internal honesty that is exhausting to sustain. He was in California for a series of small shows, part of the gradual return to touring that had filled the 2 years when recording was not possible. He was staying at a motel in the San Fernando Valley, not a famous hotel, not a place with amenities or significance. The kind of motel that touring musicians of his level stayed in because it was clean and functional and close to the venue, and the per diem covered it without drama. He had been out in the parking lot in the early evening, sitting on the hood of a rental car, doing the thing he sometimes did when he needed to think without the thinking being directed, which was simply sitting somewhere without an agenda and letting whatever needed to surface. He was aware that Harry Chapin was also staying at the motel. This awareness was not welcome. He had been avoiding Harry Chapin for several months, with the practiced, methodical avoidance of someone who has learned from experience that encounters with Harry Chapin were not containable. Chapin was 34 years old, 5 years older than Springsteen, operating at a level of commercial success that Springsteen had not yet reached, and that had given Chapin the specific energy of a man with a very large platform and extremely clear ideas about what that platform was for. He played 200 concerts a year. He had founded an organization to fight world hunger. He personally lobbied Congress. He had strong opinions about what musicians owed the world, and was not shy about sharing them with other musicians who happened to be nearby. Springsteen had been nearby several times in the preceding months. The encounters had been, without exception, long and thought-provoking, and uncomfortable in the way that being confronted with the gap between what you are doing and what you could be doing is always uncomfortable, especially when the person doing the confronting is warm and funny and not remotely hostile. He was sitting on the rental car in the parking lot, trying to think about the record when he heard his name. He looked up. Harry Chapin was on the second-floor balcony of the motel, leaning on the railing, looking down at him with the expression of a man who has been handed an opportunity and has no intention of wasting it. He was in a bathrobe. It was not yet 7 in the evening. Chapin said, "I've been looking for you." Springsteen said he'd been right there. Chapin said, "No, you haven't. You've been hiding. I can tell when someone's hiding from me because they get very interested in rooms I'm not in." Springsteen did not argue with this because it was accurate. What followed was 40 minutes of conversation conducted across the vertical distance between a parking lot and a second-floor motel balcony, which meant that Harry Chapin was above him the entire time, leaning on the railing in his bathrobe, which meant that the conversational dynamic was not precisely that of two peers, and which was, Springsteen later suspected, entirely intentional. Chapin had been talking to people for his entire adult life. He knew what he was doing with a spatial arrangement. He started with music, not with activism, not with the obligation to use one's platform for social good, which was where Springsteen expected him to start because it was where Chapin always eventually ended up. He started by asking Springsteen what the next record was about. Springsteen told him he didn't know yet. He said it in the guarded way of an artist who is still inside the process and doesn't have adequate language for it, who knows that the work is forming but cannot yet hold it in a sentence without diminishing it. Chapin did not accept this. He said, "You know. You always know. The not knowing is just the part before you let yourself say it." Springsteen looked up at him. Chapin was leaning on the railing with the relaxed authority of someone who has said true things to enough people to no longer worry about whether the truth will be well received. Springsteen said, "It's about the people who don't make it, the ones the American dream leaves behind, the ones nobody writes the songs about." Chapin was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Finally." That single word landed in the parking lot with more weight than Springsteen had expected a single word to carry. Not as validation. Springsteen was not, by his own account, someone who needed external validation for his creative choices. As recognition. As the specific experience of saying a true thing out loud and having someone hear it completely, without the need for elaboration or qualification. Then Chapin said, "Now tell me why you're not angry enough." Springsteen looked up at him. This was not the response he had anticipated. He said, "What do you mean?" Chapin said, "You know who those people are. You grew up with them. You see them at your shows every night. You're writing about their lives with the most accurate language anyone has used for those lives in a generation. And you're doing it beautifully and honestly, and all of that is real. But beauty and honesty aren't the same as anger, and some of what's happening to those people requires anger. Not just documentation, not just witnesses, someone who is actually furious on their behalf." Springsteen was quiet. This was not a comfortable thing to be told. It was also not an inaccurate thing to be told, and he knew it, the way you know things that you have been avoiding knowing, which is immediately and completely, and with the slight physical sensation of something that was locked becoming unlocked. He said, "I don't know how to be angry on stage without it becoming about me." Chapin leaned further over the railing. This was, Springsteen later realized, the moment Chapin had been working toward, not as a rhetorical trap, but as a genuine question that he had been turning over in his own practice and had not fully resolved, and wanted to think about with someone who was dealing with the same problem from a different angle. Chapin said, "That's the hardest thing. That's the thing I've been trying to figure out for 10 years. How do you take what you're furious about and turn it into something that the people who need to hear it can actually receive? Because if the anger comes through too hot, they defend against it. They stop listening. But if you process it too far, if you make it too beautiful, it becomes something they can admire from a distance instead of something that requires them to do anything." The parking lot was quiet. The evening had the particular stillness of California winter evenings, cool and clear, the sky already dark at the edges. Springsteen was sitting on the hood of the rental car, looking up at Harry Chapin on a second-floor balcony, and they were both, for a moment, inside the most difficult question that politically engaged art has ever faced, the question of how to make people feel implicated without making them defensive. How to make the truth land hard enough to matter, without landing so hard that it bounces off. Chapin said, "I think the answer is that the anger has to be inside the love. It can't be separate. If people can feel that you love the people you're writing about, love them specifically, love their actual lives, and not just the idea of them, then the anger on their behalf reads as the anger of someone who is with them, not above them. And that's receivable. That's the kind of thing people can walk into a room and feel, and walk out changed." Springsteen said nothing for a while. He was doing the thing he does when something has gotten fully inside him, the specific internal stillness of a man processing something that is going to take time to fully understand, but that he knows, already, is going to change something. Then he said, "How do you keep doing it? The 200 concerts, the lobbying, The organization. Where does it come from? Chapin straightened up slightly on the balcony. He said the thing he said, which Springsteen has quoted exactly every time he has told this story. He said, "I do about 200 concerts a year. Half of them I do for money. The other half I do for free, for causes I believe in. If I couldn't do the second half, the first half would stop meaning anything. The money shows exist because the free shows tell me what the money shows are for." He paused. Then he said, "You need to find your version of the free shows, not necessarily concerts. Whatever it is that reminds you why you're doing the rest of it. Without that, the rest of it eventually hollows out. You start doing it because you always have, not because it means what it used to mean. And the audiences feel it when that happens. They always feel it." Springsteen got off the hood of the rental car. He stood in the parking lot for a moment, looking up at Harry Chapin on the balcony. He said, "I've been avoiding you for 4 months." Chapin said, "I know." Springsteen said, "That was a mistake." Chapin laughed. The laugh of a man who was not surprised by the admission and was not going to make more of it than it warranted. He said, "Come up and have some coffee. I have 40 more minutes of opinions, and then I have to call my wife." Springsteen went upstairs. They talked for another 2 hours. Springsteen has said in the interviews where this story has come up that he cannot remember everything that was said in those 2 hours, which is the normal condition of conversations that matter most. They become integrated into the way you think, rather than remaining separate and quotable, which means that the memory of them is not a transcript, but a texture, a change in the quality of the ground you are standing on when you think about certain things. What he remembers specifically is the parking lot and the balcony, and the 40 minutes of Harry Chapin in a bathrobe, leaning over a railing, asking him why he wasn't angry enough, and then explaining, in the practical terms of someone who had been working this problem for a decade, how to be angry in a way that reached people rather than defended them against the reaching. He went back to New Jersey and recorded Darkness on the Edge of Town, the album that critics received as the most fully realized and emotionally complete work of his career to that point. The album that turned away from the romanticism of Born to Run and went somewhere harder and more necessary. The album that contained the fury and the love in the ratio that Chapin had described from the balcony. Inseparable, each one giving the other its meaning. He never told Harry Chapin what the conversation had done. There was not time. Chapin died in July of 1981, 3.5 years after the motel parking lot, in a car accident on the Long Island Expressway while driving to a rehearsal for a free concert. He was 38 years old. The free shows and the paid shows, and the lobbying and the organization, and the 200 concerts a year, and the specific, inexhaustible energy of a man who believed that the gap between what the world was and what it should be was closable, given sufficient application of time and talent and willingness to stand on a balcony in a bathrobe and talk to people who were trying to avoid you. Springsteen played the tribute concert for Harry Chapin the following year. He walked out with an acoustic guitar, and he told the story, the Atlantic Studios corridor, the hiding, the parking lot, the balcony, the 40 minutes, the ratio, and then he played one of Chapin's songs and dedicated it not to his memory in the valedictory sense, but to his continuing argument, which was the more accurate thing to dedicate it to, because the argument did not die in July 1981. It kept going in everyone who had heard it and been changed by it, in everyone who found their version of the free shows, in everyone who figured out how to put the anger inside the love, so that the love carries the anger to the places it needs to go. Springsteen has been figuring that out for 47 years. He is still working on it. He says so when he tells the story. He says the balcony conversation did not give him the answer. It gave him the right question. And the right question, asked precisely enough, in a parking lot in California, by a man in a bathrobe leaning over a railing at 7 p.m, that is worth 47 years of trying to answer it. Maybe longer. If this story reached you today, share it with someone who is doing the paying work and has forgotten what the free work is for. And if someone ever asked you the right question at exactly the right moment and changed the direction of your life because of it, tell us in the comments.